Joining me now is Andy Miller, COO of Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. Great to see you, sir.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
So when we look at this shift towards green energy, we talk about it all the time at Red Cloud. You guys at Benchmark, guys and gals, you're talking about it all the time and writing about it and holding these conferences. But what's your impression of how the rest of the world understands the need for critical minerals in the EV space and energy storage and the lack of supply? Is the world picking up on it yet, or not quite yet?
They are, slowly but surely.
Yeah.
You know, we are definitely in a different world to where we were sort of 5 years ago in terms of the understanding. People like the look of the sexy electric vehicles that were going to hit the road, but didn't really ask many questions about what was going into them or where the infrastructure was to sort of support that push towards electrification. So we're definitely in a time now when you're seeing things like lithium, you know, reach the front page of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. So it's a different world we're living in, and I think that's something that the industry is really being reflected in the industry as well. You know, automakers now, beyond just making commitments of this many EVs will hit the road or this many batteries will be produced, they're now looking right back to the mine and saying, you know, how are we going to sustain these massive ambitions?
Right. One of the trends that you've been talking about and you're noticing is the fact that automakers are they're going further upstream to get control of the supply. Elon Musk has talked about it, hasn't necessarily done it, but I know GM and other automakers have moved into that space. So tell us about that development.
Yeah, so you know, I think it's really the awakening of automakers to the fact that raw materials are one of the most central components now to their EV ambitions. To being cost competitive in producing an electric vehicle, you really do have to control the raw material. You have to control, in particular, the critical minerals and metals that are really the foundations of the lithium-ion battery. So it's definitely an area where I think a lot of automakers haven't been very comfortable to sort of expand that far up the supply chain to date. But in the past 18 months or so, we've seen some really big commitments, and you know, companies matching what the likes of Tesla have done. You know, since they announced that Gigafactory back in 2014, they had to come to terms with, you know, we need to control the raw material, we need to have an understanding, and maybe not in the case of Tesla necessarily, you know, investing in established producers, but definitely making some investments in early stage, supporting the development of new mines, and understanding that, you know, that they need a massive expansion of the raw material footprint of the industry to sustain not just their ambitions, but the wider market. So I think you see a number of other automakers now stepping up to the plate, making some really sensible and strategic moves with their raw material suppliers.
We hear a lot about there's going to be a lack of supply of copper and so many other critical minerals, and we see these bar charts, and it looks like a crisis, like a desperate situation. Is there any hype in all of this? Can you poke holes in the story? When we get to 2030, 35, will things be different? And it's hard to know, but is there anything that's not that may not come to be?
You know, I think one of the hardest things to predict in this market and forecast is technology. You know, you can see what's happening at a lab scale. You can see, you know, what clever scientists are playing around with and how they're looking to evolve the technology that goes into these supply chains. But, you know, I think the reality of the industry, certainly for the next decade, is that we're in a world where we relatively well know the technologies that are going to be deployed, right? There's a massive lead time in terms of commercializing a lot of these clean energy technologies, in particular batteries. So shifting from the established base of understood chemistries, technologies over the next decade, I think, you know, you'll see it in increments, but it's not going to really see a massive shift across the market. And for that reason, I think you're stuck with things, you know, the lithiums of the world, the coppers of the world, they are your stable components that are always going to be in these technologies. Then you can ask the question about your intensities of your nickels and your cobalts and your manganeses, but ultimately all of them are going to be needed. It's just in what volume and how that adoption and deployment of technology evolves over time.
And lastly, Andy, we're not looking for stock recommendations, but for investors, if they're seriously considering the critical minerals space, what's the one thing that they really need to think about and keep in mind when they want to allocate some money into the sector and they want to profit down the road?
Yeah, it depends on the profile of company you're looking at, but I think when we look at some of the nearest stage developers and companies that are going to play a significant role in these markets over the next few years, a lot of them have really been pushed forward by collaboration. That's either collaboration, in terms of technology for extraction and processing, or, in some cases working with the automakers of the world or your downstream consumers to really know you have that customer base there, to work with them to refine what you're producing to what they need, because ultimately this is as much a specialty chemical market as it is sort of a raw material extraction type industry. So I look at the companies that have the experience in doing that are working with the right type of companies, and that have the right plan in place to sensibly add tonnages into these industries. There's not going to be any golden bullet that will unlock a huge wealth of new raw material, unfortunately, but look at the companies who are taking a sensible approach, who are scaling in a reasonable way and have the expertise and the backing to really support that.
Thanks for the insight today, Andy.
Yeah, good speaking to you.
Okay, nice meeting you, and we'll see you again. Andy Miller is COO, Benchmark Mineral Intelligence.